Psychology spent decades trying to understand what was wrong with people who preferred being alone. It turns out the more interesting question was, what did they get right? For a long time, the research lumped everyone who enjoyed solitude into the same broad category of concern: introverts, loners, people who must be struggling with something they hadn't yet named. The assumption was built into the framing. If someone consistently chose their own company over the company of others, something must have driven them there. Loneliness, social anxiety, damage of some kind. But there is a distinction that changes everything. Loneliness and solitude are not the same experience. They can look identical from the outside. One person, one room, no one else present. But the internal experience is entirely different. Loneliness is a perceived gap. It is the ache of wanting connection and not having it. Solitude is an intentional withdrawal that restores. It is the desire to stay, not the inability to leave. One is a wound. The other, for certain people, is something closer to a superpower. Picture a Sunday morning. Everyone else in the building has somewhere to be: errands, brunch, the plan made 2 weeks ago that couldn't be canceled. And then there is the person who chose, deliberately, to stay, who made tea, who sat by the window and let the morning unfold at the pace it wanted to. Not because they couldn't be social. Not because the invitation didn't come. Because this specific quality of quiet is what makes them capable of everything else. In 2016, a research team at the University of Buffalo asked a question nobody had properly asked before. What if some people prefer being alone not because they're frightened of others, not because something damaged them, but simply because solitude genuinely makes them feel good? What they found was a distinct psychological profile they named unsociability, and it is important to understand what this term does and does not mean. It is not antisocial, which involves active hostility toward other people. It is not avoidant, which is fear-based. Unsociability is a calm, confident preference for one's own company. And the people who fit this profile, when studied, were doing remarkably well, more than well, by most psychological measures. Neuroscience helps explain why. People who genuinely thrive in solitude have a more sensitive dopamine system. Dopamine, the brain's primary reward neurotransmitter, fires in social situations, in novelty, in stimulation. For people who lean extroverted, social interaction produces a significant dopamine response that feels energizing. For people who prefer solitude, the dopamine system reaches its optimal level much faster and with far less external input. The same stimulus that barely registers for one nervous system can feel genuinely saturating for another. Neither is a flaw. They are simply calibrated differently. Alongside this, research on prefrontal cortex activity, the region responsible for deep thinking, self-reflection, and complex problem-solving, shows heightened engagement during solitary states in people who thrive in them. When neuroscientists study what the brain does when it isn't focused on external demands, they find an activation pattern called the default mode network, the system responsible for introspection, perspective taking, narrative construction, and future planning. This network doesn't switch on in noise, it switches on quietly. And in people who have learned to inhabit that quiet comfortably, it runs with remarkable productivity. This is why Virginia Woolf wrote an entire essay, A Room of One's Own, about the specific conditions that make deep creative work possible. Why Maya Angelou rented a hotel room to write, even when she had a perfectly good house. The breakthroughs, the synthesis, the ideas that change things, they rarely happen in open-plan offices or crowded brainstorming sessions. They happen on solo walks, at 2 a.m. when the world has gone quiet and the deeper signal can finally be heard. If this is landing somewhere true, if you've spent years unable to explain why you need solitude, the way other people seem to need company, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find this conversation. And, if understanding the deeper psychology behind how people are built is something that matters to you, subscribe. This is exactly what we do here. But here is where the script requires honesty. Because not everyone who retreats to solitude is doing what's being described above. There is a distinction that matters enormously, and it comes from Abraham Maslow. Healthy solitude comes from a place of abundance, not scarcity. You enjoy being alone because you've had meaningful connections, and you know you can have them again. You're not running from people. You are running toward yourself. The question isn't simply whether you like being alone. The question is why. If your honest answer involves words like recharge, think, create, process that points toward the healthy unsociability the research describes. If your honest answer involves words like safer, easier, less exposed, that points toward something else, not broken, not wrong, but worth a more honest conversation with yourself, and perhaps with someone you trust. The healthiest relationship with solitude is one where it is genuinely a choice, not a defense. Where you could connect if you wanted to, and sometimes you do want to. For the people for whom it is a choice, something interesting happens to the relationships they do choose. Dr. Bella DePaulo at UC Santa Barbara found that people who embrace solitude often maintain stronger connections with friends, family, and community than might be expected, sometimes stronger than their more socially oriented counterparts. The reason is specific. They are not trying to extract everything they need from a single relationship. They arrive at connection without the weight of unmet need pressing against every interaction, not clinging, choosing, and there is an enormous difference between the two. They have also quietly rejected a cultural narrative that most people never even notice absorbing. The language of romance, of partnership, of social life, is saturated with the idea of incompleteness, that other people are what make us whole, that solitude is the state we endure between the moments of real living. People who have genuinely made peace with their own company have looked at this narrative and found it simply untrue. They are not half of something. They are, as one simple way of putting it, a whole set already. This is not arrogance. It is the specific form of self-awareness that develops in people who have spent real time with themselves, who have sat with their own thoughts long enough to know them, who have learned what they actually value rather than what they've been told to value, who know the texture of their own silence well enough to recognize when something in it has changed. In Japan, there is a word for this quality of intentional alone time: hitori. It is not merely tolerated in Japanese culture. It is accommodated, even celebrated in solo restaurant booths designed for one, in cultural practices built around the understanding that existing with yourself is a legitimate and complete way to spend an afternoon. The contrast with how the West has historically treated the person eating alone or spending a Saturday at home by choice is its own form of data. One culture built infrastructure around this need. The other still asks, with mild concern, why you didn't come to the party. The world needs people who can sit with themselves without immediately reaching for distraction, who can think deeply without requiring constant stimulation. Who knows the difference between genuine connection and the particular exhaustion of performing connection for an audience? In an era of relentless connectivity where availability has been collapsed into obligation, the ability to genuinely enjoy your own company may be one of the most quietly countercultural capacities a person can develop. The most misunderstood thing about people who prefer being alone is not that they can't connect. It's that they've discovered something about the relationship with themselves that most people spend their whole lives chasing through other people. They learned some of them early. Some of them, after long years of being told they were doing something wrong, that the quality of every relationship you have with anyone else begins with the one you have when no one is watching. That is not isolation. That is the foundation. Do you find that time alone genuinely restores you, or do you sometimes wonder if you're using it as shelter from something you haven't yet named? Leave it in the comments. The honest answer tells you more than you might expect. Thank you for watching.